I arrived in Hong Kong with a suitcase of dreams and a hunger I'd carried for years. Back home, I'd been a working performer music, theater, film, always busy, always hungry for the next project. Yet, there's this quiet, stubborn wish that kept nagging at me to be a performer on the road, in another country. Somehow I thought of China. Months later, I saw an ad. Ocean Park, Hong Kong needed performers for a special show. I didn't hesitate. So, on a warm, somber October morning, I stood in Manila's airport and said goodbye to my beloved, now departed mama. The plane sliced through clouds, and as Asia's world city came into view,
it hit me. This was the very first time I left my country. Yes, I was a late bloomer in foreign travel for three reasons: lack of money, fear of flying, and a life transition from a full-time activist life. But no need to unpack those now, for this story begins with a bus ride going to a small flat in Tok Hua Wan. 15 women squeezed into a two-bedroom, one-bathroom apartment. That should have been an obvious red flag, but for the first week, I was just too excited, right, to notice. Our visas, accommodation, and food were covered. And a month on stage in Hong Kong felt like a dream come true. But the dream frayed quickly. The agent told us there were two salary figures. One was filed with the Hong Kong and Philippine authorities, and the other, half the amount, paid to us. Yes, I didn't grasp the gravity at first. 5,000 HKD sounded like a fortune compared to a 400 peso minimum wage back home. We lived 15 to a toilet, ate on $10 food allowance a day, and were told our wages would be transferred to our Philippine accounts after we returned. It smelled so wrong. But naivety and longing dulled my usually sharp fairness radars. Well, that changed when I met a friend who worked at Disney and shared stories of people, including himself, who successfully challenged their employers. Needless to say, it made me question my situation. His energy pushed me to look into Hong Kong labor laws. And on our off days, he showed me how to ride the MTR to get to the immigration and labor offices. He was truly instrumental in strengthening my conviction to prepare for the inevitable battle ahead. I prepared meticulously. At first, I meant to fight only for myself. In hindsight, that might have saved me added anguish on top of the already stressful decision to confront the employer. But I chose otherwise. Like a freaking masochist, I set out to represent all 80 of us, talents from Manila and Cebu, against this recruiter who treated our contracts like paper masks. Anyway, so by then, the momentum cannot be stopped. On our last week of our contract, I turned my off days into a campaign. I started in our cramped flat, talking to the women about my plan over junk food and soda. And I told them to sign a petition of support so that we can present a united front. 14 signatures came back. The next morning, half of those 14 vanished. Yes, doubt is contagious. Fear is louder than reason. Rumors crowded the stairwells. Some accused me of hypocrisy for speaking up just now. The others said I was sabotaging future prospects of returning to Hong Kong. A big faction, mostly men I'd barely spoken to, called me a traitor. By the third day, the signatures dwindled to 5 names, including mine. It was obvious the petition would not go any further, and the women in my flat, most of them had retreated into silence. It should have been enough to make me regret and quit. The tremendous tension and anxiety were brewing. But I've invested so much of myself now to give up. I was undeniably exhausted and raw, but not broken. And so, on our last show, I did what I intended to do on stage and prepared for the hardest scene yet, confronting the recruiter. My mind looped through worst-case scenarios. What if he sued me? What if I lost? What if I ended up behind bars? And then I told myself a slippery consolation. If I end up in a Hong Kong jail, well, at least food, bed, and efficient cleanliness would be taken care of, right? So with that comforting thought and acceptance, I gathered my papers and asked to speak with the employer in private. The negotiation itself is a blur now, cinematic in my memory, breathing fast, my heart pounding like a drum beaten by a soldier on a war field. My words spewed through clenched teeth, and to my shock, he agreed. He accepted all my core demands, and he'd even pay for the damages, moral and otherwise. My God, relief came through like waves I could barely stand. The nearly $500,000 Hong Kong dollars, which I cited as potential penalties, I think tilted the outcome. So, on our last day, as suitcases thudded and hugs were given to new friends, I felt pity for the women in my room who had pulled back. Without thinking, no politics, no optics, I slipped 500 HKD each to 5 of them who were in the room at the time. And I thought it's for their trip back home and for their empty pockets. I came to Hong Kong with only 10,000 pesos, roughly 1,300 HKD. Somehow, after the settlement, it had grown enough to share. They left with only recruiter promises. I left with the fruits of my labor and with the certainty that with courage, one can truly create one's destiny. Now you may ask, why risk so much for a fight almost no one supported? Well, I spent my life so many years in activism before leaving the Philippines. I stood up for students, workers, farmers, the urban poor. To fold when it's time to fight for myself would have been a betrayal of that courageous life. But the story didn't end when the plane doors closed. While the others flew, I stayed behind, auditioning instead. I played guitar and sang Nina Simone's Blues for Mama for a music agent who loved it and offered to sponsor my work visa for a year. And many more years after that. I do not live the activist life like I once did. The long campaigns for the sidelined sectors of society are chapters I carry in my bones. Now, I pick my battles very carefully. Hong Kong has been good to me all these years, sometimes demanding, but also rewarding. I intend to stay and keep on overcoming with a quiet resolve whatever obstacles this once foreign, now familiar land brings. For this too has become my safe haven, my Hong Kong.